So I want to introduce a newfound friend of mine. This is Craig Shields from Two Green Energy, and I think this is something, the conversation that I'm about to have with Megan Birney of the Community Environmental Council will be of interest to the Two Green Energy readers. So why don't we fire away? Megan, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Craig.
All right. Well, let's talk about a little background, a little introduction here. Do you want to tell us about the kind of mission statement of the organization?
Sure. I work at the Community Environmental Council, and we are an environmental nonprofit. We were founded in Santa Barbara in 1970, so we've been around for about 42 years, and throughout that time we've been very active at identifying and then trying to solve some of the toughest environmental problems in the region. Right now, we're focused on energy and climate change issues and moving our region away from our dependence on fossil fuels, and that's really where we're at today.
That's wonderful. But when I was in your office, I guess it was sometime last week, your claim to fame earlier, you've had some monumental successes over a period of time, correct?
That's correct. We're best known for our efforts in recycling. We actually started curbside recycling as we do it across California right here in Santa Barbara. We started at a local level, got homeowners and businesses involved. It was adopted by the city and the county and the waste haulers, and then eventually our staff actually went and worked on the state level. And so yeah, as we recycle today, it was actually started by the Community Environmental Council right here in Santa Barbara.
So that's fantastic. That's quite a contribution. Thank you. So I've just put up the next slide.
Right. So where the CEC has been working on efforts we've done a lot of policy work, we've done a lot of educational work, and where we are now is that we're actually trying to get into what we call social enterprises. So efforts that first and foremost further our mission. In this case today we'll be talking about the part of our mission that's switching to cleaner forms of energy like solar power, but also help CEC be self-sustainable. We came across this type of model last year with a program called Solarize at Santa Barbara. It was a model taken from Portland, Oregon, and the idea here is to help homeowners go solar. We had great success. We had 50 homeowners in a 3-month period and installed 200 kilowatts, but we realized that there's a lot of people out there that could also use our help, including commercial businesses. So we started a partnership with some local foundations, including Social Venture Partners, the Gilday Foundation, and the Santa Barbara Foundation, in an effort to figure out why the adoption of solar was at such a low level across Santa Barbara County. At the time, I think we only had about 35 or 40 commercial solar installs in all of Santa Barbara. And what we found was that for the most part, Santa Barbara businesses are not owner-occupied. About 80% of business owners actually lease their buildings. So solar has a hard time in this commercial sector, but we did find that they had all of these problems, including electricity costs being out of their control, but energy is a huge percentage of operating budgets for quite a few businesses. Further, whether you're in Edison or PG&E territory here in California, the price of electricity keeps going up at about 5% per year. So we have all these common problems, but we have this issue where occupants don't own their buildings. We call it the renter-owner conundrum.
Yes, I understand. So you have a proposed solution to that, I presume.
Well, what we actually found was not a solution to that. That's in the little longer term. What we found was a market niche that doesn't have that owner-tenant conundrum, and that's the nonprofit sector.
Okay.
The nonprofit, we found about 1,000 nonprofits in Santa Barbara County that own their buildings. Mm-hmm. Further, there's a few other issues with commercial buildings or commercial businesses. Most commercial businesses tend to only look 2 to 3 years in the future. Nonprofits are looking 5 to 10 years in the future. while energy can be a big portion of operating costs, seeing a small savings isn't always a huge impetus for a commercial business to move forward, while a nonprofit, even small savings can mean big improvements in programs. Mm-hmm. And it can mean that they have a better chance of actually getting further funding, because if you can bring down operating costs, it's easier to fund when more of your money is going to programs. So there's this opportunity we found with nonprofit buildings, and that's kind of why we are focused on them, because they don't have the exact same profile as the traditional commercial business.
Well, I find this fascinating because I've always deemed that the low-hanging fruit, as much as I'm into renewable energy, mm-hmm. the low-hanging fruit from the standpoint of changing the carbon footprint is much more in efficiency and conservation than it is in renewables. Yet you can't, and you would think that the CFO of a for-profit corporation is going to see an investment in something like that, and is going to be, smacking his lips. It's such a no-brainer, driving costs out of the equation with efficiency. But it's very, very difficult to get these people to invest in that, and I've long wondered why.
We actually saw quite a few local businesses investing in efficiency that had longer leases. If a company had a lease over 5 years, you saw lighting upgrades. We saw HVAC. We did a commercial market study. I think I forgot to mention that. We did a commercial market study, and we actually saw that if they have a little bit of a longer lease, a lot of the tenants were doing those efficiency upgrades and didn't necessarily need us. If they had a 1 or 2 year lease, no, they were not doing those. And oftentimes we talked to business owners who didn't know if they were going to be here in 12 months, so couldn't actually justify even doing a lighting replacement, which we can't blame them for that. So that's one of the reasons we are looking at solar, because a lot of the efficiency improvements are already being made by those in the situation. And when we do go to any nonprofit or commercial business, the first thing we always advocate for is energy efficiency.
Yes.
That's included in any of this. But again, as you mentioned, the paybacks on those are fairly quick. So they often don't need long-term loans for energy efficiency.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, very good. Here's the next slide.
Sure. Could you actually go back one, Craig? Sorry.
Sure. Not at all. Hold on a second. I'm sorry. I'm having trouble with that. You want this one. This one, right?
Right. So this is kind of the overview of what we're trying to do. The idea is to create a nonprofit private partnership where the nonprofit acts as a host for solar electricity, and then a private LLC is brought together to actually own the system and sell the electricity to the nonprofit. The investors of this LLC get a return on their investment, as well as tax credits and depreciation. The nonprofit host gets a fixed cost of electricity, saving thousands of dollars in the first years and up to hundreds of thousands of dollars by the end of the 20-year term. And then CEC, the Community Environmental Council, we get a developer's fee. So this helps us remain a sustainable business model as a nonprofit while also furthering our mission. So if you want to go to the next slide, this is what we're calling community-supported solar. So again, the key players here are the nonprofit hosts. They need to have long-term operations in Santa Barbara. They need to own their own buildings or have what we're calling a benevolent landlord. And then they also need to have adequate roof space or somewhere to put solar. But other than that, there aren't a ton of requirements for the host, which is really nice. There's a lot of nonprofits. We think a couple hundred in Santa Barbara that could qualify for this program. The next player is the investor, and the investor needs to have tax appetite to take passive loss from the tax credits and then the depreciation especially. So we're looking for either C corporations or individuals with passive income as capital investors in these projects. The next two players are the Community Environmental Council, and our role really is to identify the hosts and also the investors and kind of pair them up, and then work with Wiser Solar, who's our partner in this, and they do the engineering and the finance and the legal, and then they also do the long-term O&M, and we'll talk a little bit about them in the coming slides. But those are kind of the key players. And this slide is a little confusing, but the idea is basically what I just walked through. So if you start with the nonprofit host, they're buying electricity from this community-supported solar LLC. That LLC is funded through the equity investors and a loan. And those equity investors get the tax credits, the depreciation, and a return on their investments. CEC helps kind of pair them all together, and then Wiser Solar does the technical aspect. So this is just a flow chart for those who are more of visual learners on how everybody interacts.
I understand. I thought you did a good job explaining not only the flow chart but at the conceptual level. It's very good.
Thank you. So the whole goal here is to lower and stabilize the cost of energy. This graph is actually from the Discovery Museum in Santa Maria. It's a children's museum, and we looked at their existing rates. They're paying about $18,000 a year today for electricity, and we ran the numbers and we figured out we can actually stabilize their cost of electricity just under $15,000 and keep it that way for the next 20 years, where if they stay with PG&E, remember rates go up about 5% per year, within 20 years they're paying upwards of $45,000. So if you take the sum of that, we're saving them about $200,000 over the course of 20 years, which is pretty substantial for a nonprofit. And the reason that we think the Community Environmental Council can be successful is because we are a trusted organization in town. I've been in the solar industry for a while and often hear from salespeople that they have a hard time securing electricity bills, and that's always one of the first steps to understanding if you're a good candidate for solar is getting electricity bills. But people know the Community Environmental Council. They know that they understand our mission and what we're trying to do, and that we are there to help them. So we've had absolutely no problem securing electricity bills and contacting the people that we need to contact in these organizations. So we really do think that we can be successful here at saving the hosts significant amounts of money while also returning a secure investment for our investors.
That's great. So what are the risks? It seems like somebody must be risking something. Like, for instance, I don't know the Discovery Museum, but imagine that it's no longer around 5 years down the line. Can you talk about risk and how it works and who absorbs it?
Definitely. So with the first thing we do with your example is that the nonprofits need to be long-term occupants of their building and of the region. With the Discovery Museum in particular, the Hutton Parker Foundation actually owns that building, and they've, if they were to leave, they would house another nonprofit. But we're really looking for those long-term, stable nonprofits. So that's the first thing we do when we are looking at hosts. Also, if the nonprofit does cease operations, let's just say there's something drastic or dramatic happens, there's a few options, either removing the solar panels and putting them on a different building, or selling the electricity to a new occupant. So we're not out completely if the host, even if the host does cease operations.
Right.
The other thing we hear is, what if there's an earthquake? And this is the same with any type of investment. You have to have insurance. If it's within the depreciation period to avoid recapture, we would need to repair, to rebuild, which is the reason that we would have insurance. So we feel like we've mitigated that risk fairly well. Mm-hmm. The other risk people bring up are the government financial incentives expiring. Existing legislation for remember we talked about tax credits and we talked about accelerated depreciation. The tax credits are actually good through 2016. So we've got a few more years. We actually have about three and a half more years before that expires. And all that has to happen is that the system has to be placed in service by then.
Mm-hmm.
The bonus depreciation is the 50% bonus depreciation I mentioned actually expires at the end of 2012, but the projects are still eligible for makers depreciation, the basic depreciation schedule that all businesses can get. So it's not that the investor wouldn't get their return if we installed it next year. It would just take a little bit longer.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah, and then the last question that we hear is about the solar panels themselves. It's important to remember that all panels are warranted for 25 years, plus our partner, Wiser Solar, they actually have one of the partners in their firm comes from the solar panel manufacturing world. So he is very good at this and knows the reputation, not just the reputation, but the true happenings of a lot of the solar panel manufacturers. So we depend a lot on his insider knowledge, but we do take care to review all the manufacturers and to ensure that they are offering that 25-year warranty.
I'm sure. Very good. Here we go.
So the next slide, I've mentioned Wiser Solar a couple times. They're made up of primarily three individuals at this point. Mike McGuire, for those in Santa Barbara might know Mike. He was in the banking industry for quite some time. Stephen Honickman, who is a lawyer, and then Nathan Holman, who is the gentleman who comes from the solar manufacturing world. And their idea is really to streamline the process and match solar hosts with financiers. And their website's wisersolar.com. I'm not doing them justice on this slide, but they do a lot of great work. One of the biggest things that we've seen is their ability to do the solar analytics and the feasibility assessment. They've actually built a platform internally that looks at the electricity use and the different tariffs, so electricity rates, and you can run a program and it will tell you how much solar you need and which rate schedule you should be on with your utility, and it's far and away one of the most impressive things I've seen in the industry in a long time, because anyone familiar with electricity rates will tell you there are hundreds of tariff structures, and it is very hard to figure that out. So having a computer algorithm to help is great.
Oh, I can imagine. I've been at these shows talking to people, the Renewable Energy Finance Forum or the Energy Storage Show, and I go to experts and I say, I can't figure this thing out. And he goes, and I've had people say, well, it took me years to figure this out. And plus, you're in California. It's almost straightforward in a place like Texas, but in California, it's Byzantine.
Yeah, it is. And it's very hard to understand the rates, let alone understand which rate you need to switch to have your optimization of your solar, and it's a beast. So very excited that they've got this tool. They also do project oversight, management, and development, so they're kind of running the construction side of it, as well as doing the long-term monitoring and accounting and reporting. So they're the ones who are in the long-term monitoring and taking care of the system. CEC will remain involved the entire time, but they're kind of doing that back-end work.
Very good.
This slide is for our investors. There's a lot of things that go into a system, how much it's going to cost, how much the investors will, and this is kind of what this looks at. So the first thing is obviously the cost of money. We talked about getting a loan. So in our model, a loan covers about 40% of the system cost, and then the equity investors cover the other 60. So that's kind of one aspect, is the cost of money. The other aspect is the cost of the system. As we all know, the cost of solar panels have decreased dramatically in the last 18 months, but there are still a lot of permitting costs and things like that will add to the cost of the system. But the system costs are coming down, and that's really an exciting thing for everyone. The other thing to look at is the PPA, or the power purchase agreement rate. So this is the rate at which the nonprofit host is actually paying for electricity generated, and that'll be a huge factor. If they can, bigger systems, sometimes cost a little bit less, but and can sometimes absorb and smaller systems can sometimes absorb higher rates because they pay more to their existing utility. So this is kind of one of those balancing acts we have.
Yes.
And then the last part is the term of the investment. Is it a 7-year, 10-year, 20-year investment? So these are all the things that we're working with right now, and we're trying to identify investors, and we have equity investors, and we have a general outline of what we're looking for. But if this slide is to say, if our investors came to us and say, I need 8% on my investment, I need 12% on my investment, we can go into our model and fiddle with these other factors and see if we can make one of these projects work. Because we do have hosts that are interested, but we are looking for investors right now.
Okay. Now, let's talk about this PPA. So is there net metering? Do you sell power back to the grid if you're over generating?
So there is net metering. The idea is not to sell power back to the grid because you can only get about 4 cents a kilowatt hour.
Right.
Your
That's
power.
where I was going with this.
But you've got 12 months of net metering, so we will ideally size the system so that it covers 12 months of electricity usage, but no more. Usually we're somewhere in between 75 and 85% of generation will be taken care of by the solar array.
Okay. Very good. On we go.
So the next thing we're talking about is what does this look like for an investor? As I mentioned, we've got some hosts, including the Discovery Museum in Santa Maria, that are interested, and we've modeled their projects at 7% because, again, these are nonprofits, so we're really trying to bring down their costs. If an investor came to us with a different expectation, we could definitely try to work on it. But let's just assume an investor came to us and 7% works for them. There's a few things that the investor gets. First is that 30% tax credit that we mentioned, and that is a discounted at the that is a discounted tax credit. So, for example, if for every $93 that we get in capital costs, the investor gets $100 in tax credits. The next part is the depreciation. So there's, again, this is for this year, 2012. There's a bonus depreciation of 50%. That's on top of the normal schedule of 20% depreciation. So you're writing off the majority of the system in the first year. You also get the standard write-off for the system. On top of that, any capital remaining in the project, you're also going to get a 7% return on that while the investor is still in the project. And the goal here is really to have these equity investors out there with 100% of their return, their investment plus the return back in 7 years. So that's what we're aiming for here.
Very interesting.
So that takes us to investor requirements. There are a few. The first one is any investor must be an accredited investor, and that is defined in the SEC rules. The depreciation that we've been talking about, the accelerated depreciation in the standard, must be taken against passive income. A lot of individuals who have real estate will have passive income, or again, C corporations. And C corporations can take this depreciation against any income. Actually, they don't have to have. There's no distinction.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, because it's basically seen as a business investment and they're both business investments. Whereas a individual, you don't have all of your income is not considered a business investment. That's why it has to be passive, which again is mostly real estate, which if you think is a business investment. So that's kind of how the IRS does that.
I see.
We're requiring that investors remain invested for at least 6 years. Again, the concept here is that you don't want to risk recapture with those tax credits and the depreciation. So the investors needs to stay committed at 6 years, and that goes with the next requirement that they're going to need to hold the investment for long enough to accumulate the full cash-on-cash return. So again, it's going to be probably year 6 or year 7 before that's completed, because that ROI is funded by the power purchase agreement, that electricity payment coming in.
I see.
So that's something to remember. And then we do have minimum investments. We're looking at minimum investments of $50,000.
Okay.
So.
Well, an accredited investor has what, a net worth of something that certainly is going to dwarf $50,000.
Correct, and they're going to be in the top income brackets. I think it's $1 million is the minimum for the accredited investor. And what we're trying to do, we had 2 projects in our pilot projects phase, which might be the next slide. Oh, no, it's not, but that's okay. And the idea is that we actually are trying to raise about $300,000. So we're looking for 5 or 6 investors, but one investor, one company could do this on their own if they wanted to. And that's what happened at Congregation Benai Brith, which is this slide. We didn't work on this project, but Wiser Solar did. The congregation was paying about $21,000 a year, and they had an investor, a congregation member who was interested in this type of investment, and he actually funded the system and will receive the tax credits, the California rebates, the depreciation, and then also the cash flow from the sale of energy. The system itself is providing about 75–80% of the demand for that location. And then it's reducing demand charges, which is huge. If you're paying commercial rates, you're going to have generation charges and demand charges, and that's one of the best things about solar. It not only offsets your electricity use, it actually brings down your demand charges when you flip to renewable energy rates. So that's something that they're seeing as a great cost savings. And at the end of this power purchase agreement term, the system can be left on the roof for what's called fair market value, which IRS defines as, I believe, 20% of the original cost. So they're looking at their kind of long-term how they can purchase the system, again, after the investor receives the returns, and then have no electricity bill basically for the life of the system.
Well, that's fantastic, which is at least 3 or 4 times the 7 years we're talking about.
Correct. And then the thing about solar panels is while they're warranted for 25 years, what's warranted is their production. So they are required to produce 80% of their production at the end of 20 years. But at the end of that time, it's not like the solar panels stop working. The great thing is that they have absolutely no moving parts. Their solar photovoltaic is the only energy generating technology that has no generator. It's simply moving electrons. So these are really hardy systems. We've seen great track records with them, and systems that were even installed in the 70s are still producing.
Yes, so I understand. That's fantastic.
So I mentioned this, so I'll just very quickly walk through it. We are working on a pilot project right now. We've got a couple potential hosts, and we're looking to install about 200 kilowatts of solar, which will run about $500,000 to $1 million in overall system costs. And Wiser Solar, our partner, has already secured the debt portion, so that 40%, and we're actually out looking for an investor pool to fund the tax equity portion of that.
Mm-hmm. Great. And this, I believe, is your last slide.
So, we're very much looking forward to working with the community investors. You can reach the Community Environmental Council. You can reach me through our website, which is cecsb.org. Or you can give us a call at 805-963-0583. The website's probably the easiest because all that's there. And we're definitely encouraging people to spread the word, talk to your friends and neighbors and co-worker or colleagues, and if this is something you think they'd be interested, send them our way, and we'd be happy to meet with anybody on a one-on-one basis and see if this would work for them.
Fantastic. Great presentation. Thank you very much. I'm very turned on by this whole concept. And I wish you all the luck in the world with this. It's a terrific concept.
Thank you very much, Craig.
All right. Keep up the good work, all right?
Thank you.
All right, now. Bye now.